3 years after we walked into the timberline, a pair of hunters stepped into our clearing and found our camp proudly untouched, tent lines still pitched tight, a blue mug resting where Blake had left it, and one of Zane's little cameras blinking like a tired eye that refused to close. The air up there runs cooler than you expect in August, high 50s before noon, and they said the ground smelled like wet iron and pine, as if time had taken a breath and held it. Drop your city in the comments and subscribe if stories like this remind you how quickly peace can disappear. I've spent most of my adult life measuring days in tones and textures rotor wash on a hospital roof, the tick of a wall clock in an ER, the weight of a radio pressed to my shoulder. In 2016, I was splitting shifts between the county ambulance and the medevac crew out of Cascade Falls, a town stitched together with porch flags, 2 diners, and a hardware store that still cut keys by hand. My duplex sat 2 blocks off Main, where the evening air carried the smell of cedar mulch and gasoline, and the neighbor across the street left a baseball on his mailbox so his grandson would know which house was his. Life made a steady sound back then. Screen door slaps, shop bells, the distant train at 9:30. When I wasn't on call, I ran the loop by the river before the heat climbed into the 80s brewed coffee that steamed the kitchen windows and checked the pharmacy drawer where I kept extra gauze and a pulse ox just in case. It was an ordinary life that fit like a well-worn jacket. Blake didn't fit anything ordinary. He had a way of treating a Tuesday like a starting gun. He handled brand partnerships for a sportswear company out of Portland and lived on the idea that a big push could turn into something permanent. In our driveway, he would unfold maps the size of dinner tables, pin their corners beneath water bottles and a bag of almonds, and start drawing lines up ridges, little circles around water sources, arrows that carried straight through whatever we had planned for the weekend. He leaned on reassurance the way some people lean on humor. "We'll plan for 20 miles like it's 10, he'd say. Then we'll stop early and look smart. I loved him for that certainty, even when it felt like a coin tossed into a locked fountain. Zane was never without a camera. He kept batteries lined in a tackle box with masking tape labels, and he had a habit of cleaning lenses with a breath and the hem of his shirt like a priest tending a chalice. He could make a grocery run look cinematic, the cart's wobble, the fluorescent hum, my hands weighing a sack of rice. He'd say, "Hold for sound," and the whole room would go quiet as if the world agreed to help him. Cole followed close behind, all elbows and grins, pitching one-liners that softened hard edges. He carried useful odds and ends in his pockets, safety pins, a golf tee, a nail file, so it always seemed like he'd prepped for the problem you hadn't met yet. Ivy worked off a legal pad and a pencil, and I never once saw either get lost. She didn't pack late. She laid out gear on a towel, checked expiration dates, weighed each bag. When she stood at a trailhead, she looked up first, not out reading the hills like a score she'd practiced in another life. And Nova. Well, Nova was the gravity. She pulled us forward with a look that said we had already done it, already crossed the ridge, already set the shelter before the wind swung. She moved like the air belonged to her. Not careless, but certain. On nights when I came home with the county's dust on my boots, she'd drop off a lasagna with my name scratched into the foil and a note that said, "Tomorrow we run." The idea came together the way big ideas often do, slowly, then all at once. We'd done long weekends along the coast, bivvied on a fire road above the Deschutes, even spent a 3-night stretch in the Tillamook, where everything smelled like rain and wood smoke. But Blake wanted 30 days no cell service, no resupply, except what we carried a camera plan that would let Zane cut daily episodes when we got home. It wasn't just a stunt. It was proof of concept. He said a month would show real weather, real morale, real recovery when things dented the plan. If the series landed, there were sponsors waiting enough, he hinted, to make the thing we love, the thing we did. I said yes, out loud and more quietly to myself. I'd been in enough bad corners to understand that preparation buys you hope. I started a kit on the kitchen table: compression bandages, steri strips, oral rehydration salts, a backup tourniquet I hoped never to touch. I verified the dose on our epinephrine, taped a blister kit in bold red, and slid a false bottom into my pack with a pair of sealed glucose gels. Small comforts you forget until you need them. We hit the grocery for shelf-stable food and watched the receipt climb into numbers you feel in your stomach: powdered eggs, coffee beans, rice tortillas, spices, a brick of chocolate for morale. Back home, we split goods into daily rations, shook bags to settle them, and tucked them into bins like we were laying out a parade. Cascade Falls rolled out summer like it always did. County Fair, 3 nights of fireworks, mossy picnic tables near the falls where river spray kept the air 10 degrees cooler than town. The sheriff's office pushed a bulletin about fire restrictions and trail etiquette. At the clinic, the old night nurse set out extra bottles of sunscreen by the door with a handwritten sign: "Take one. They're free." Folks I'd known for years stopped me in produce aisles to ask how long we'd be gone and whether we'd carry bear spray. "You kids be careful," they said, even though most of us were well past 30, and it made me smile. Worry is its own language here, probably the richest one we speak. We met in our driveway the night before the drive-up. It was still 82 after sunset heat and the concrete lifting like breath. I knelt to check Buckles' tested stove valves with my thumb, watched for fuel leaks. Zane rattled off a camera schedule like a surgeon laying out tools. Ivy read aloud a weather forecast that promised stable highs in the 70s once we climbed above 4,000 feet. Cole threaded paracord into a neat hank and taught me a knot I'd forgotten since paramedic school. Nova Hare tied up, spun an empty Nalgene in her palm like a coin, then set it down and hugged me hard. "We're ready," she said, sounding like a pitcher who'd just watched her team turn a double play. The morning we left Cascade Falls was washed in that thin kind of light you only get when a marine layer drifts this far inland. We loaded into 2 SUVs and pulled onto the highway with the windows cracked. Barn swallows skimmed low over cut hay, and for a few miles the smell of clover pushed right through the dash vents. Blake kept 2 fingers on the top of the wheel and drummed a rhythm I'd half learned after a year together. He'd look over and point at a ridge and tell you where the water would run if a storm hit, and he wasn't often wrong. I held quiet for most of that first hour, not from nerves, but from a sense that these small comforts, his voice, the light, the heat, building on the windshield, were worth watching as they were. We reached the last town on the way in near noon, the kind of place with a single gas station that also sold bait jerky and ice cream bars out of a chest freezer. I remember the way the door hinge sang when we pushed through the bell with a cracked clapper and a little boy in a ball cap counting quarters at the counter for a can of grape soda. We took the fuel we needed. I bought a paper map off a rotating rack that felt a decade out of date, then paid extra for a pencil sharpener because Ivy had packed 2, but I knew how pencils travel. It was 90 out on the pavement, and the pump handle burned the edge of my palm. Life runs on small rituals that turn into anchors. Someone always checks tire pressure. Someone else shakes the fuel cans. Someone wipes the windshield whether it needs it or not. That day, the rituals felt almost ceremonial, careful, precise. We leaned elbows on the hood and traced the logging roads we'd use to reach the trailhead, counting miles against a ruler until the numbers matched what Blake wanted. A logging truck rolled by, dragging wood smell behind it, and sawdust shimmered in the heat like lake water. I caught the clerk watching us through the glass and waved. She lifted 2 fingers in a wave, back eyes closing against the glare. We crossed into the high country on a road that spent its time deciding whether it was gravel or dust. Pine gave way to fir and spruce. Shade came in strong patches, thick enough at times to drop the cab 10 degrees in an instant. Cell bars fell off one by one, as if discouraged by the trees. We called out mile markers the way pilots call altitudes, counting down switchbacks, until the coordinates on Blake's map matched the little sign nailed to a post. Up there, the air tasted clean and metallic. Even my city ears could tell the difference between wind in the canopy and wind running through a creek bed. We had to shout once to bump a mule deer off the ruts. She climbed the bank and turned, staring at us long enough that I felt the old superstitious tug to say thank you out loud. At the trailhead, we did our last checks. Zane snapped the traditional boots on the bumper. Photo laces, threaded toes pointed outward. The lot empty except our 2 rigs and a county truck turned nose into the shade. Ivy taped a photocopy of our basic plan in each vehicle route timeline emergency contacts, then tucked the originals into a plastic sleeve in the glove box. Cole slid a handwritten note to his mother under the passenger floor mat, not because he thought it would help, but because he liked the idea that there'd be a word for her to find when we came back, something to keep until the next thing we did. Nova stood with her hands on her hips and watched a cloud slide past the sun, like a lid taking its time. Hikers always talk about the first half mile, how the pack finds your shoulders and your pulse pulls a steady drumbeat out of your chest. I felt good. Garden variety warm-up ache in my quads, the bite of the waist belt, the little squeak my right boot had developed that month. The trail ran narrow between Huckleberry and Salal, then opened to a section where downed trees had been cut cleanly with a saw fresh work, probably the county crew. We moved in a loose line, speaking when we needed to and letting the forest swallow our words when we didn't. At a ridge overlook, we drank water that tasted like pennies and sun, and Zane panned his camera across a sweep of green that felt too big to fit in one frame. The first quiet note came soft. You feel it before you hear it, the absence that tucks into your ear like a finger. The usual chorus thinned in the late afternoon, and I told myself it was heat, or the way shade pools. We hit a marshy section where frogs should have made themselves known, but the water sat glassy and unspoken. I tightened a strap and told no one. Our boots clicked on a little footbridge someone had set over a rivulet, and the sound bounced away too quickly for how close the trees stood. Near dusk, we pulled short of the clearing Blake had picked, choosing instead a flats area closer to water. We built our little village by the book lines, high and neat, bare hang ready, cookset far from the tents. Dinner was simple and good rice and beans dressed up with a pinch of garlic powder, steam fogging headlamps as the last light fell sideways through the trees. Zane clipped a small motion lens to a branch and tapped the button to test it. The indicator glowed the tiniest heartbeat in the dark. Cole stacked wood for the morning and brushed his hands on his shorts, content with the order. Ivy checked the stove for leaks twice, then checked it a third time because the first 2 are habit, and the third is for peace. Nova stood on the edge of camp and watched the last line of sky fade between the trunks, shoulders back. Hands easy. We turned in early. The temp dropped quick upper 40s by midnight, and the night air crawled down my sleeves until I zipped them tight. From my tent, I heard the creek talking to itself and a fir throwing off a cone somewhere in the brush. It made a sound like a knuckle on a door 2 rooms away. I settled. Blake shifted beside me, his breath slow the way it gets when he's not thinking about anything at all. I reached for the headlamp and flicked it off. On the walk in at that little gas station with the squeaky bell, there had been a man who watched us from the far end of the counter. He didn't buy a thing, didn't say a word. He stood with his back to the candy bars and looked through us like we were figures on a screen. I told myself he was just passing time. Now, lying under the nylon with the cold working under the zipper, I thought about the way his eyes didn't blink much, about how he stepped outside when we did, and paused by the ice chest as if remembering something he'd lost. Sometime after midnight, the creek's voice softened and left room for a single whistle far off, thin enough to be wind close enough to stand the hairs on my forearms. Our porch light back in Cascade Falls would be glowing over an empty step, a habit against nothing in particular. Out here in the timber, the dark pressed closer than it should, and the camera's tiny red dot kept blinking into the quiet like a patient heartbeat that was just a little out of time. The whistle came again, low and drawn out like breath caught in a bottle. It slid between the trees until it sounded almost human. I sat up, unzipped my bag, and listened. Blake stirred beside me, mumbled something about wind, and rolled over. I waited another minute before switching on my headlamp. The beam hit a wall of pine trunks and the thin thread of the creek. Nothing moved, but that kind of silence has its own pulse. You can feel it pressing against your chest. I told myself to lie back down, but the habit of staying alert is hard to break when you've lived by radios and alarms. I checked my watch. It was 2:47 a.m. The fog was just starting to creep in off the water, thin as gauze. I remember thinking it smelled wrong, like wet metal instead of moss and soil. By dawn, the sound had stopped and the world looked brand new again. Sunlight reaching through the trees in straight, perfect lines. We packed up breakfast and tried to laugh about being jumpy, but nobody really found the rhythm. Even Zane, who usually had his camera rolling before anyone spoke, left it in his bag that morning. We started toward the next ridge around mid-morning, the air thick with the kind of heat that builds before a storm. By the time we reached the gravel turnoff near Cascade Falls, the last gas and groceries before the wilderness, our nerves had settled a little. We needed to top off the tanks and grab one more jug of water before heading in. The station sat alone on the bend, a faded sign clattering in the wind. A single truck idled near the pumps, an old Chevy with mud up to its doors. When the man stepped out, it felt like the temperature dropped 10 degrees. He was tall, shoulders rounded from years of carrying something heavy, his clothes the color of the dirt around him. He smiled when he saw us, but didn't blink much, and there was a kind of stillness in him that didn't match the daylight. "You folks filming something?" he asked. Blake told him we were doing a month-long survival challenge testing new equipment for the channel. The man's smile held, but his eyes flattened. "Wouldn't take that route if I were you," he said, nodding at the map spread on the hood. "People go missing up there." His tone wasn't warning, it was possession, like those woods were his to decide who belonged. He said his name was Wade Brennan. Claimed he worked as a guide for hire, though he didn't mention any outfitter. He leaned over the map close enough that I could smell tobacco and something sour under it. "You'll want to stay clear of the North Valley," he said. "Old ground. Some places aren't meant to be walked." Ivy asked what he meant, and he stared at her for a long beat before answering. "You'll see." Zane lifted his camera just out of instinct, and before he could hit record, Wade's hand clamped over the lens. "Don't point that thing at me," he said quietly. The pressure in his voice carried more weight than a shout. Blake apologized, tried to ease him off the subject, but Wade wasn't done. He reached into his truck, pulled out a folded paper, and spread it over our map. It was a hand-drawn chart of the same range covered in symbols I didn't recognize. Triangles, spirals, something that looked like eyes. "This way's safer," he said, tracing a line that veered hard west of our plan. "The other way, that's a dead end." Blake thanked him, but said we'd be sticking to our original route. Wade's face twitched, first confusion, then a flash of something meaner. He gripped Blake's arm, fingers whitening, and hissed, "You're making a mistake." The look in his eyes didn't match the casual setting, the pumps, the dust, the far-off hum of traffic. It felt too close, like something that should have happened in a dream instead of a parking lot. I remember the heat of his hand, the way Blake's skin went red beneath it. I stepped forward, told him to let go. For a second, I thought he might hit me. Then his mouth turned up again, that half-smile sliding back into place. "Didn't mean no harm," he said, almost cheerful now. "Just don't say you weren't warned." When we finally pulled away, Wade stood by the window of the station, watching his face pressed to the glass. We drove the next hour in silence. The road narrowed, trees pressing closer until the light broke in patches. Cole tried to lighten the air with jokes about backwoods profits, but nobody laughed. I caught myself checking the side mirror more than once. When the cell signal vanished, I felt it like a door closing. Still, Blake was steady. He said Wade was probably just a lonely guy trying to scare outsiders, and maybe he was right. By the time we hit the trailhead, the day felt too beautiful to waste on one man's bad mood. The pines were tall enough to scrape the clouds, the creek sounded like silver rolling over stones, and Zane finally brought out the camera again, capturing the sunlight through dust motes like falling glass. We signed the logbook, shouldered our packs, and stepped into the shade of the trees. The forest swallowed noise in a way I hadn't felt before. Not silent exactly, just layered. Footsteps on the duff, the hiss of water somewhere below, an occasional branch giving up a pine cone to gravity. By the second mile, the hum of the outside world had completely vanished. No planes, no faraway engines, not even birdsong. Nova joked that we'd picked the quietest forest in America, but her voice carried strange in the air, thinner somehow. We pushed higher until the light took on that late afternoon amber, and when we finally broke onto a small rise, Blake called it perfect. A flat patch beside a stream sheltered by fir on 3 sides and open to the south for sun. We made camp there, 3 tents in a horseshoe, a small fire ring in the center. For a while, it felt like the promise of what we'd come for. The next 2 days ran clean and easy. We built a lean-to for supplies, rigged a tarp over the cooking area, and set motion sensors for the night shots. Zane documented every detail from breakfast coffee to washing up in the stream. We fell into rhythm, the kind of steady work that calms a group. By the 3rd night, we had routines for everything: who gathered wood, who filtered water, who kept watch when the rest slept. But there was something in the air that didn't match the peace. Small things. The woods would go too quiet too fast. Shadows seemed to move before the wind did. And sometimes, just when the fire burned low, I'd swear I heard that same whistle curling through the trees. Blake chalked it up to nerves, but even he started looking over his shoulder more than usual. That 3rd night, the sound of footsteps cut through the camp. Dry leaves snapping slow and deliberate. I remember the way Nova's head turned before anyone else's, her hand already reaching for the flashlight. The beam caught the edge of a figure standing just outside the firelight. It was Wade. He didn't speak at first, just stared as though confirming something for himself. Then he stepped forward, the fire throwing light across his face. "Brought you something," he said, dropping a bundle near the flames. Canned food, bottled water, all of it filthy. The gesture might have looked kind if not for the way he moved, circling our setup, touching things without asking. He complimented the tents, the camera rig, the way we'd built the fire ring. Every word dripped with mockery. I tried to thank him, hoping to end it politely, but he wasn't interested in leaving. He said he felt bad about the misunderstanding at the gas station, wanted to make amends. Blake told him we were fine and didn't need anything. Wade's face hardened. "You sure?" he asked. "There's better land north. More water. Safer." Blake repeated himself firmer this time. The change was immediate. The smile disappeared and his voice dropped to a growl. "You don't respect what you don't understand," he said. He took a step closer, close enough that I could see the line of dirt under his nails. "These mountains don't forgive arrogance." Zane's hand moved toward his camera, maybe for proof, but Wade's head snapped toward him before he could lift it. "Don't," he said, quiet but sharp enough to cut the air. For a moment I thought he'd lunge. Then Nova stood, her flashlight steady on his chest. "You need to go," she told him. Wade studied her for a long second, then smiled again, smaller this time. "You'll wish I hadn't," he said. He backed away, slow, step by step, until the dark closed over him. Before he disappeared completely, he turned once more. "The mountains are watching," he called, voice floating like a hymn. When it faded, nobody spoke. We sat there until the fire went to embers. I took the first watch that night. Every few minutes I swept the flashlight through the trees. Once the beam caught eyeshine, maybe a deer, maybe not. I whispered to the camera instead of the journal that time, saying things I couldn't quite explain, that the air felt charged, that I could sense movement where there shouldn't be any. What I didn't know was that he was out there listening close enough to hear every word. The next morning, Blake found fresh prints near the creek, heavier than any of ours leading in and out of the water. We debated breaking camp, but decided to hold one more day. Part stubbornness, part denial. None of us wanted to admit fear had entered the picture. Still, the rhythm broke. Zane stopped joking through his lens. Cole's laugh, the one that usually came easy, sounded forced. Ivy checked her maps twice, then started keeping them zipped inside her tent. That afternoon, Wade appeared again. He didn't sneak this time. He walked straight in, carrying a bundle of fish tied together with twine. "Caught these for you," he said. The smell hit first rotting flies already working the flesh. I told him they were spoiled. His eyes narrowed. "Fresh this morning," he said. When Blake tossed them into the woods, something snapped in him. His face went red, veins rising at his temples. "You people don't listen," he shouted. "You don't deserve this land." Then he stormed off, muttering about outsiders and punishment. After that, it wasn't just fear, it was waiting. Waiting for the next time he'd show up for what he'd do next. Each sound in the forest became a warning. We slept in shifts, knives close, the fire burning low, but never out. I kept the satellite messenger tucked in my pack, comforted, just knowing it was there. The night he came back, I reached for it, and my heart stopped. The antenna was cleanly severed, not torn cut. That was when it hit me. He'd been inside the perimeter while we slept. The thought settled heavy in my chest. He wasn't random anymore. He was methodical. I don't remember falling asleep that night, only waking to find Nova sitting upright, her eyes fixed on the dark beyond the tents. "He's out there," she whispered. The air had that still weight again, like before lightning. Somewhere in the distance, the whistle began soft, patient circling the camp. Blake moved closer to me, his hand brushing mine, a quiet promise that we'd handle it. But there was something in his face I hadn't seen before. Something that said he knew just how deep we'd walked into something we didn't understand. By sunrise, the forest was quiet again, every branch still. We brewed coffee. None of us drank the steam, twisting into the cool morning air. Zane kept the camera rolling without speaking, the lens pointed toward the tree line, as if it might catch proof of what our eyes couldn't. And though the day warmed, I couldn't shake the chill in my arms, the feeling that somewhere out there, Wade Brennan was waiting for us to make the next move. That was the morning everything started to shift, from strange to dangerous, though we didn't have the words for it yet. We just packed lighter, spoke softer, and kept glancing behind us, counting the sounds that didn't belong. The morning light that followed should have felt like a reset, clean air, new chance the forest rinsed of the night before, but it didn't. It felt thinner somehow, as if every sound was coming from farther away than it should. We moved quietly around camp, pretending things were normal. Cole built the fire like muscle memory, and Ivy checked our supplies one more time, counting under her breath. I poured water through the filter, but it came out cloudy, a faint film floating across the surface like oil. I stared at it longer than I should have, then dumped it out and tried again. Blake kept his tone steady, talking about filming schedules, camera angles, the next challenge we'd shoot. But I could see the tension in the line of his jaw and the way he kept glancing toward the tree line. Zane was already filming, documenting everything in silence, and for the first time that camera made me nervous. It had always been our safety net proof that what we were doing mattered, that if something went wrong, someone would see it. Now it just felt like a target. It was late morning when Wade showed up again, walking straight out of the woods like he'd always belonged there. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him came another man, older gray hair sticking out from under a torn cap. His clothes were filthy, his eyes flat, unfocused. Wade introduced him as Marcus said he was another guide who knew the mountains better than anyone. Marcus didn't say a word. He just stood behind Wade, watching each of us the way someone might watch animals at a fence. I remember the smell, sweat, unwashed clothes, smoke. Not the kind that lingers from campfires, but something heavier, stale. Blake told Wade they needed to leave, that we'd come here to film alone. Wade's grin was almost playful. "You'll want us close," he said. You folks aren't built for this kind of country." He moved through the camp like he owned it, dragging his hand along the tents, brushing the handle of my med kit with the back of his knuckles. "These are nice," he said, eyes flicking to me. "Too nice for what's coming." Marcus still hadn't spoken, but every time I looked at him, he was staring at one of us, studying faces like he was memorizing them. Zane lifted the camera again. "Let's keep this rolling," he said, half under his breath. The red light blinked on. Wade turned fast, quicker than I thought a man his age could move. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, slapped the camera from Zane's hands, and it hit a rock, snapping in half. Zane stumbled back, his arm catching the corner of the fire pit, and the look on Wade's face when he did it wasn't anger. It was satisfaction, like he'd been waiting for an excuse. The noise froze everyone. Marcus took a step forward, and that was the first time we saw the knife. A long hunting blade, dark from use. He didn't raise it, just let it hang loose by his side. The message was clear enough. Wade straightened up and looked at Blake. "Your guest's here," he said, "and you've already worn out your welcome." Blake stepped forward, his voice low and even the same voice I'd heard him use to talk down angry clients. "You need to go," he said. Wade laughed, a slow, wheezing sound that didn't reach his eyes. "You think you're in charge?" He took one step closer, then another, until they were chest to chest. I didn't even see the moment it changed, just felt it. The air went sharp, charged. Nova reached for her knife, small but steady in her hand. "Back off," she said, her voice steady but her hand shaking. Wade looked at her, really looked, and for the first time since we met him, something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty. Marcus leaned in and whispered something I couldn't hear, and Wade nodded. Then, just as suddenly as they'd come, they both stepped back. "We'll be around," Wade said. "You'll need us soon." They didn't walk away far. We could hear them talking. Their voices low, the occasional laugh that didn't sound like laughter at all. We huddled together, whispering plans. Ivy wanted to pack up and hike out immediately. Cole agreed, said he'd rather risk getting lost than stay one more night. Blake wanted to wait until daylight to move, he said. The terrain would be too dangerous in the dark. "We'll make it worse if we rush," he told us. He was right, and we all knew it, but staying meant another night with Wade somewhere nearby. That evening, the wind shifted. The smell of their campfire drifted through the trees. Wood smoke mixed with something else, maybe meat, maybe something we didn't want to name. Zane sat apart from the group, trying to salvage the footage from the shattered camera. The pieces lay spread out on a tarp, and he kept his head down, muttering about how the drive might still work. It was the only sound besides the fire. When it finally got too dark to see, we set the perimeter lights. I checked the messenger again, knowing what I'd find: the cut antenna, the useless screen. It felt like a small death in my hands. Sometime after midnight, the noise started. Whistling again, but not from one place. It came from every direction at once, rising and falling like wind over broken glass. We stayed still, afraid to move, afraid to make it worse. Then came footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. They circled the camp once, twice, then stopped. The silence afterward was worse. I don't remember falling asleep, only waking with the sun and the sick certainty that we were no longer visitors out there, we were prey. Wade and Marcus were back by dawn, standing just outside the tents. Morning meeting. Wade said cheerful, almost friendly. Marcus held a knife not pointed, just present. They'd gone through our gear during the night. Our packs were open, supplies scattered. The water tablets were gone. "So we're half the food rations." "You won't need these," Wade said. "You came out here to survive, right? Time to start learning how." His grin widened when none of us spoke. He made us line up and perform tasks, crawl through mudlift rocks, gather wood, like children being punished. Marcus watched, timing us with a cracked wristwatch, smirking when someone stumbled. When Cole complained, Wade grabbed him by the hair and forced his face into the stream until bubbles broke the surface. It was over in seconds, but the message was clear. I stayed quiet, counting heartbeats, trying to stay small. Wade's attention shifted often, but it always came back to me. He found excuses to touch my shoulder to correct how I held something, to lean close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck. I've treated trauma victims for years, seen what power looks like in the wrong hands. I knew what was coming if we didn't act. That night, we agreed on a plan. When Marcus went off on one of his long walks, we'd rush Wade, 3 of us at once, take his knife, grab what we could, and run. It felt like a plan when we whispered it. By the time it happened, it felt like a prayer. Nova approached first, pretending to ask about plants, keeping his attention while Blake and Cole circled behind. I saw the moment Wade sensed it. He turned fast, faster than I thought possible, the knife flashing. Blake went down first, a shallow cut across his chest, not deep, but bloody enough to freeze us. Then the sound of another voice, Marcus shouting from the woods. He hadn't gone far after all. He grabbed Ivy from behind a blade pressed under her chin. Wade pulled a revolver from his jacket, an old thing but steady in his hand. "Try that again," he said. His voice was calm, almost soft. "Please." We didn't move. He tied our wrists with the rope Marcus carried, the kind used for hauling game, thick and rough. When someone tried to shift, he'd tighten it until the skin burned. Marcus finally spoke, his voice hoarse, like he'd forgotten how to use it. He told us about hikers who'd come before, about outsiders who'd ignored the warnings. The way he said it, flat, almost reverent, made my stomach turn. Wade nodded along, calling us ungrateful, saying the mountains chose who stayed. He talked about a ceremony, a way to make things right, his words slipping into something that sounded rehearsed, practiced. That night he built a new fire, bigger, hotter. The smoke rose straight into the trees. He said the next sunrise would be our welcome, and the way he said it left no room for misunderstanding. I remember the glow of the flames on Marcus's face, how it lit his teeth when he smiled. We sat bound, too tired to cry, too scared to hope. The air felt wrong, charged heavy. I could hear Zane breathing unevenly beside me, the click of the small backup camera in his pocket turning on. Somehow through all of it, he'd kept it hidden. The faint red light pulsed against the dirt. When I think back on that night, what I remember most isn't the fear. It's the sound, the wind dying completely, the crackle of fire, the muttering from Wade as he drew symbols into the dirt with a stick. I remember the smell of blood on Blake's shirt and the way Nova's jaw clenched as she whispered a prayer she didn't finish. We didn't know it then, but those hours were the last time the world would make any sense. Just before dawn, Wade looked up from the fire. "Tomorrow," he said, "we start the offering." His eyes found mine when he said it. I kept my face still, but inside I knew whatever was coming, it would start with me. Outside the circle of light, the forest waited. The fog was building again, crawling low through the trees. Somewhere in that gray, something shifted, watching. I could feel it. Not just them anymore, something else patient and listening. And as the night thinned into the first color of morning, I realized the mountains weren't silent at all. They were holding their breath. When morning came, it felt wrong from the start. The air wasn't cold anymore. It was heavy damp, almost electric, like the space before a storm that never breaks. Wade had been pacing the camp long before sunrise, his boots cutting lines into the soft dirt around the fire. He said he was preparing the ceremony that we'd be joining the mountain the way outsiders were meant to. His voice had taken on a rhythm low and steady, the kind people use when they're talking to themselves instead of anyone else. Marcus stood nearby with his arms crossed, eyes half shut, knife resting against his thigh like a natural extension of his hand. Nobody dared to move without being told. I could feel Blake's blood on the sleeve of my jacket from where I'd pressed against his chest wound the night before. He'd insisted it was shallow, said he could still hike, still fight if he had to. but I could see the fatigue setting in. Every breath came shorter than the last. When Wade finally turned toward us, the morning light caught his face, and I noticed something new, small streaks of dirt or ash smeared under his eyes like war paint. Today, he said quietly, "We make peace." He walked in a slow circle, muttering words I didn't recognize, carving shapes into the ground with the tip of his knife. Each time the blade hit a rock, that metal-on-stone sound cut through the silence and made my stomach twist. Marcus ordered us to sit in a ring around the fire pit. The rope marks on my wrists were raw and pink by then, but I didn't feel them. Fear dulls everything except the things you can't afford to forget. As Wade moved around us, the chanting got louder. His words didn't make sense, but the intent did. He believed every syllable. When the stick broke, he switched to using his hands, digging symbols into the soil until his nails bled. Zane kept his head down, pretending to cough when his camera made a faint click inside his pocket. I prayed Wade didn't hear it. Nova sat to my left, whispering something soft enough that only I could hear. "When I move, you move." I gave the smallest nod I could manage. Blake's fingers brushed against mine behind his knee, a quiet reminder that we still had each other, even if that was all we had left. It went on for hours. The sun crawled higher, burning through the fog in slow, fitful bursts. Wade stopped every so often to talk to the fire, as if waiting for it to answer. When he finally turned his gaze back to us, his eyes locked on mine. "The mountain wants a sign," he said. "A life for a life." My stomach dropped. He took a step forward, and Marcus grinned for the first time that day. I could feel every heartbeat in my throat. "She'll do," Wade said. His knife tilted toward me like a gesture of politeness. I thought about the medic bag I'd lost, the tools I'd trained with for years, all the lives I'd patched up on the worst nights of their lives. It hit me then that nothing I knew could help me here. Blake moved first. He rose to his knees, blood still seeping through his shirt, and told Wade to take him instead. Wade laughed an ugly cracking sound that didn't belong in the open air. "You're already half dead," he said. "She's still got something to give." Marcus tightened his grip on the knife, the edge catching the light like a signal. I remember thinking, this is it, and then everything changed. It started with the wind. It came sudden and sharp, dropping the temperature by 20 degrees in seconds. The sky dimmed, though the sun was still high. A sound rolled through the trees. Not thunder, not wind, exactly more like pressure, the earth exhaling all at once. Wade froze mid-step. The fire hissed flames, shrinking as if pushed down by an invisible hand. The animals, silent for days, suddenly stirred. Crows burst from the trees. Squirrels scrambled across the undergrowth. Even Marcus turned, scanning the woods with something close to fear. Then came the fog. It rose from the stream, first thick and fast, curling around our legs until it swallowed the camp whole. My skin prickled with static, and the air smelled like copper and ozone. Wade tried to keep chanting, but his voice cracked. The fog swirled tighter, forming a wall so dense we couldn't see 10 feet ahead. I could hear movement, footsteps that weren't ours, circling us the same way the whistling had. Zane's camera light blinked red through the haze, catching fragments of shapes moving beyond it. I don't know how to explain what happened next. One second, Wade was shouting for Marcus to hold his ground, and the next, his voice pitched into a scream. The fog twisted around him like a living thing, spinning faster and faster until all I could see was the outline of his body. He reached out as if to grab something, but whatever he touched pulled back harder. Marcus lunged to help, but the same force caught him, yanking him sideways into the gray. Their screams overlapped, raw, panicked human, and then they were gone. No footsteps, no bodies hitting the ground, just the echo fading into the distance. The air went dead quiet again. For a moment, none of us moved. The only sound was the rasp of Blake's breathing. The ropes that had bound us had loosened somehow, the knots slipping free as if the fibers themselves had relaxed. I remember the heat of the fire returning suddenly, the smell of smoke mixed with something metallic. We scrambled up, half blind, calling each other's names. The fog thinned as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a clearing that didn't look like ours anymore. The trees felt closer. The stream slower, the air different, heavier. Ivy pointed out that the compass in her watch was spinning, needle-jerking in every direction. "We need to move," Blake said. His voice was weak but steady. "Now." We packed what we could find, half-empty rations, one flashlight, the broken camera, my field knife. Zane checked the remaining cameras. One was still recording. I told him to leave it running. Part of me thought if something happened to us, that little red light might be the only thing left. We started walking south, or what we thought was south. Every trail looked different now. Landmarks we'd marked days earlier, the split tree, the rock with a groove like a scar, were gone. The forest was the same, but wrong, rearranged somehow. By the time night fell, we were exhausted and lost. The fog still lingered, but higher now, hanging in the canopy like a ceiling. The woods were too quiet again. We stopped in a small hollow to rest. Zane tried the radio, but it only spat static. Nova found a patch of ferns and sank down, rubbing her wrists. Nobody spoke for a long time. Finally, Blake said, "If we keep moving east, we'll hit water. Water leads to people." It was the kind of logic that keeps you breathing when fear wants to take over. We started again at dawn. Every direction looked like the last. The forest floor was untouched, no footprints except our own. The stream we'd followed looped back on itself twice, ending in a shallow pool lined with stones. That's when we realized the compass wasn't broken. It was us. The world around us had changed. We found a small rise and set camp again, though it didn't feel like shelter. Zane filmed what he could, pointing the lens toward the mist that still pulsed faintly between the trees. When the sun hit it just right, it shimmered almost like heat waves on asphalt. I told myself it was just light, just moisture, but deep down I knew better. Nature doesn't act like that. As the hours stretched, our voices got smaller. The woods didn't echo anymore. When you spend enough time outdoors, you get used to the way sound carries, how even a whisper can travel yards in the open air. But now it died inches from your mouth. We tried calling for help anyway, voices cracking until they were barely more than breath. The silence after was complete. That night we made a fire with what little dry wood we had. Blake leaned back against a tree, his shirt still dark from the wound eyes unfocused. Nova sat beside him, her hand over his. Ivy kept the fire alive, feeding it piece by piece as if afraid it might disappear like everything else. I sat opposite them, facing the fog. Every so often I thought I saw motion inside it, flickers of shadow that didn't belong to wind or smoke. Zane finally spoke. "If we don't make it," he said, "someone will find the footage." He pulled the small camera from his pocket and set it between us. "At least they'll know we tried." I wanted to tell him that wasn't going to happen, that we'd make it out, but the words wouldn't come. They would have sounded like a lie. The fire burned low around midnight, and I watched the fog start to drift closer again, slow and sure like a tide coming in. The forest made a faint whispering sound, leaves rustling without wind. I could almost make out voices in it. Familiar ones, calm, beckoning. Wade's tone. Marcus's rasp, echoes threading through the mist. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, pulling at the edges of my mind. I remember closing my eyes for just a moment, and when I opened them, the fog had reached the camp. It coiled around the base of the fire, around our legs, cool and damp against my skin. Blake stirred eyes, opening confusion flickering there. "Sage," he whispered, and I turned toward him. That was the last clear thing I remember before the firelight vanished. The next thing I knew, it was morning again, gray and soundless. The fire was cold, untouched, as if it hadn't burned in hours. The fog was gone. The woods were still. I looked around for the others, but for a long time I couldn't see them. My voice came out small when I called their names. One by one, they answered, faint and far. We were all still there, but something in the air had shifted. The forest felt emptied, like the sound had been pulled out of it. We tried to move again, but every path turned us back toward the same clearing. We'd walk for an hour, then find our own footprints, our own half-burned fire. The sun didn't rise or fall, it just stayed pale and constant, trapped in that early light. I can't say how many days we wandered. Maybe 2, maybe more. Time had no edges left. We stopped talking about getting out. We just kept moving until our legs couldn't carry us any farther. The last clear image I have is of Zane kneeling by the stream, washing his hands in the cold water, then setting the camera down on a rock. He looked over at me and said almost to himself, "If this stays, someone will know." His voice trembled, but his hands didn't. I nodded. I didn't know what else to do. After that, memory gets patchy. The forest faded into gray, and the sound of water became the only thing left. Somewhere beyond that, a voice, faint, impossible, called my name, though I couldn't tell whose it was. When I blinked, I was alone, standing in the same clearing where it had all started, tents still up. Food sealed, everything untouched. The fire pit was cold but clean, like someone had scrubbed it. The fog was gone. Even the footprints had vanished. I waited for the others to return, but they didn't. The woods were silent again. And in that silence, I realized the mountain hadn't taken them all at once. It had left me to see what it looked like when time stopped, when nature forgot to move forward. That was the last thought I remember before the world went white. I remember the light most of all. It wasn't bright or holy or anything. People write about it was flat gray and endless. The kind of light you can't measure, the kind that doesn't warm you or fade. I don't know how long I stood there in that clearing where everything had started. The tents still pitched, the water still clear in its bottles, the food sealed and untouched. It looked like time had stepped out for a moment and forgotten to come back. There were no tracks, no wind, no sound, just that heavy stillness pressing against my ears. I called their names until my voice broke. Blake, Nova, Ivy, Zane, Cole, but the sound went nowhere. It was like the forest had swallowed it before it could reach the trees. When the rescue team finally found me, I was sitting beside the fire ring, knees drawn up, watching a single leaf burn slow to ash. They said I'd been missing for more than a week. I didn't argue. They wrapped a blanket around me and led me down the trail I couldn't remember walking. I tried to tell them about Wade and Marcus, about the fog and the voices, but the words came out thin and unreal, like I was reciting someone else's dream. The sheriff listened anyway. He was kind about it. Gray hair, steady hands, but I could see the way his eyes shifted toward the deputy, that quiet look that says she's in shock. They found no trace of the others. No bodies, no blood, not even footprints past a certain point. The cameras were still running when the search team reached the camp. 3 of them were pointed toward the tree line, still blinking red. The footage was hard to explain. The forest visible in one frame didn't match the forest in another. Distances changed. Objects moved between shots without anyone touching them. At the end of one clip, just before the battery died, a shape flickered through the fog, 2 figures side by side, one tall and one smaller. The searchers froze the frame and lightened it, but the faces were gone to static. For months after, I kept expecting someone to call to tell me they'd found something new, fabric bone, a knife, anything. But nothing ever came. The official report listed unknown environmental factors and potential human interference. It didn't mention Wade or Marcus by name. Their identities never checked out. The name he gave at the gas station didn't belong to anyone. His truck, when they traced the plate, came back to a vehicle junked 20 years earlier. It was as if the 2 of them had been ghosts even before the mountains took them. I spent the next year in therapy, though most of it I don't remember clearly. Shock works its own kind of mercy. It dulls everything sharp enough to cut you. Sometimes I'd wake at night with the smell of pine smoke in my throat and the sense that someone was standing just beyond the bedroom door. Other times, I'd dream of that fog rolling back through the trees, and I'd see them there, my friends walking away from the firelight into the gray. In the dreams, they weren't afraid anymore. They were just gone. The footage Zane left behind became part of the investigation. The FBI reviewed it frame by frame, cataloged every timestamp, every sound. They said there was a 5-hour gap that couldn't be explained, like the files had looped or time itself had skipped. One agent told me off the record that he'd never seen anything like it. He said the forest in the last video didn't match the topography of the area. Almost like you were somewhere else, he said. I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. 3 years later, hunters stumbled across the same clearing. Everything was still there, tents upright, food sealed, batteries half full. Even the footprints we'd made were preserved in the dirt, untouched by weather or animal. It made no sense. The sheriff called me personally that day. His voice was careful, like he was handling glass. "You might want to come up," he said. "It's exactly as you left it." I didn't go. Some places are better left behind, even when they keep calling your name. They filmed the site for the record photographs, drone footage, soil samples. Nothing had aged. Not the rope, not the fabric, not even the firewood stacked beside the ring. It was as if the mountain had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to look again. One of the hunters said the air in that clearing felt thick, like standing underwater. Another swore he heard someone whisper his name, but there was no one there. They all refused to go back after that first day. I don't blame them. The case stayed open for years, passed from one detective to another. Eventually, it was labeled a cold file with anomalous evidence. That's bureaucratic language for unsolved but inconvenient. The sheriff retired not long after. His replacement never called me once. Time kept doing what it does best. It buried things. I tried to rebuild a life. Moved east, took a job teaching emergency response to new EMTs. I found comfort in routines again, in the smell of coffee at dawn, in the hum of traffic outside my apartment, in the predictable rhythm of people trying to save other people. Still, on quiet mornings, I'd hear that whistle in my head, the one that started it all. Soft, distant, always just beyond reach. I'd look out the window and catch myself checking the tree line even when there wasn't one. People sometimes ask why I keep telling this story, why I reopen a wound that time has mostly closed. The truth is, I don't tell it for answers. I tell it because silence is worse, because 5 friends walked into a forest that never gave them back, and pretending otherwise would make them vanish twice. I tell it because someone needs to remember their names. Blake, Zane, Ivy, Nova, Cole, and the sound of their laughter before all of this began. They were ordinary people chasing something extraordinary, and they didn't deserve what found them. The cameras, the files, the official statements, those belonged to the investigators. But the memories, those belonged to me. The way Nova would hum when she cooked, the way Cole could make a joke out of anything, the way Ivy always carried extra matches even when we didn't need them. Blake always the leader, drawing maps on napkins, dreaming bigger than sense allowed. Zane seeing the world through a lens that made it seem worth saving. These are the pieces I keep, the ones untouched by fog or fear. Every year, on the anniversary of that trip, I drive north. I don't go all the way up, just far enough to see the mountains rise against the horizon. I sit on the hood of my car and listen to the wind. Some days it's quiet. Other days it carries something faint and familiar, laughter maybe, or the crackle of a fire. Once I thought I heard footsteps in the brush behind me, slow and even, like someone pacing. When I turned, there was no one there. Just the smell of pine and the rustle of leaves settling back into place. People like to believe every mystery has a shape, a beginning, a middle, an end. But not all stories work that way. Some stop mid-sentence. Some dissolve into silence and wait for you to decide what happens next. The official files will tell you the 6 of us went into those woods, and only 1 came back. They won't tell you that I still see them sometimes, not in dreams, but in flashes of memory that come without warning. The slant of morning light across water, the crunch of gravel under boots, the sound of someone whistling an old tune you can't quite place. Those are the moments that remind me they were real, and that the line between the living and the lost isn't as wide as we think. I've learned not to fight the memories when they come. They're not haunting me. They're holding me to the truth. That what we found in those mountains wasn't just danger, it was the edge of understanding itself. A place where the world folds in on itself and leaves you to choose whether to look away or keep watching. We kept watching, and the mountain watched back. Sometimes late at night I replay the last bit of footage we salvaged. Just static at first, then a faint shimmer like fog catching the light. In that grainy blur I can almost see them, 5 shapes moving away from the fire, slow and steady into a gray that never ends. I stop the video before it fades to black. That's where I like to leave them, still walking still together. If this story stayed with you, share it not for views or headlines, but so their names don't get lost in the dark. Because some stories never end. They just keep echoing, waiting for someone to listen long enough to hear what's still out there. And if you ever find yourself in a quiet place, standing in the woods when the wind suddenly stops, don't move. Just listen. You might hear them too.